Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm David Pendergrass. I'd love today to pick back up where we left last time, which is hearing my testimonies, and I'm here on the podcast with Stephen and Mark. Stephen, what about you? Anything you want to share your testimony?
Be happy to. A lot like Mark, I grew up in the church, had a lot of really great experiences, also had some really bad experiences, and the worst of which were being around a lot of hateful people. And especially at a younger age, there were a lot of people in the church that were acting no differently than they did in school. Like, say, make fun of what people were wearing or gossiping and basically treating church like a social club more than a church, a place for Christians to get together and help each other become better disciples. But still, overall, I had a good experience. Loved God, loved Jesus. I was in the Bible drill. That's the deal where everybody stands in a line and sees who can get to a verse the fastest and things like that. I did like the sense of community. I liked the wholesomeness to it. There was a lot that I didn't understand. I hear a lot of people say, "Yeah, when I was real little, my parents had me going to church, and the teachers, boy, they didn't like me because I had these questions and blah blah blah. Like I knew better." I had questions, but I never took it that far to think it was just all hogwash. But I did have a lot of questions that were not answered. And a lot of times I didn't ask the questions because at the particular church, I never got the feeling that it was okay to have doubts. You just believe it, believe it, believe it. Which, by the way, is that's fodder for anti-Christians, So, yeah, blind faith is not what it's about, but I'll get to that. So anyway, overall, good experience. I was saved at around age 12, I believe, and baptized. And like a typical kid, I got in trouble. I was always interested in pranks and, cutting up and making people laugh and things like that. And things were all going good until I was about 17, and a very close friend of mine died in an accident that I saw, and it rocked my world. I mean, because we went to church together, and around this time we had gone to a new church, which I still have the most fond memories of. It was a small church, but very good people. It was very close knit. A lot of friends started coming to the same church, so we played on the softball team, the church softball teams, and it was a lot of fun. There was definitely a social aspect to it, like all our friends go there. But I have to say, we did take Bible study and things like that seriously. We were by no means saints. We got in trouble, for doing silly stuff at school and things like that. But overall, I felt like I had a pretty good idea of what the North Star was, like what's right, what's wrong. And I didn't really have a lot of doubts about where I was going to go when I died and things like that. But when that friend of mine died, that was really rough. And then right around that time, my parents split up. And just thing after thing after thing. And I rejected God. Just, you know what, dude, if you want to be like that, after all, I've been through for you, all the people I brought to the church, I prayed and all that. What was the point in all this, So I was mad at God. Now, at the time, I knew I was mad at God, but I was beginning to tell myself that God didn't exist. Like I was trying to intellectualize it. So, but at the root, in hindsight, I was really just mad at God. I thought there was no way a good, all powerful God would let things like this happen. Went off to college, and things got worse. Take a few intro to philosophy courses and history courses, and a lot of atheist professors and things like that. What little bitty bit of faith that I had that would kind of spring up every now and then was just gone. It was so easily displaced because I'd grown up in a church where we were told you just have faith. I didn't understand. I'll put it this way. I didn't even understand until not that many years ago that Paul wrote the majority of the New Testament.
Mm.
I didn't know that. I thought the people that wrote the four Gospels were those actual people. There was so much I didn't know. And so when I got off to college, it was really easy for me to be, I would say, fooled into believing that there's no historicity to the Bible. It doesn't make sense. There's too many inconsistencies. And then I got into the classes, like, say, comparative religions. And I was like, oh, so they're really all the same. They're all equally true and false at the same time. Just this kind of stuff, which made it even easier to want to do the things I wanted to do. And around this time, so I'd say another, many, many, many years, I dabbled in, like you were talking, Mark, I dabbled in Buddhism. Now, when I say dabbled, it wasn't just really dabbling. I really tried to understand it because I knew there was something else bigger out there, and I didn't know, I had no clue what it was, but I was like, I need, when I say there's something bigger, I needed some sort of thing to be my North Star. I had to make sense of things somehow. And we all have to do that, whether it's science is the way to go, or scientism or naturalism. You have to have some sort of worldview. And I was really, really looking. I checked into, like I say, Buddhism, pantheism, and Eastern, like Hindu stuff. And then after that, none of it would sound good for a while. And I would think, hey, this is really cool. If you want, you can just pretend God is I feel bad even saying it, but I would say you could just pretend God's a real good looking female, and that's fine with you just doing whatever you want to do, and is always going to welcome you home. Or maybe there's nothing, like just kind of making a mockery of the whole thing, because I was so smart. I knew better. I had intro to philosophy. Yeah. So that went on for a while. And, really because none of that was really intellectually satisfying either for any sustained amount of time. Now, I know there's a lot of people that would differ. There's, say, the Dalai Lama. I would imagine that dude believes in Buddhism. It didn't stand the test of time with me. I could poke just as many holes in it as I could Christianity. So then I went off, and that was into the darkest part of my life. I was around 30, and I was basically a nihilist. I didn't think there was any meaning at all. It didn't matter. The world could blow up, so we're all going to die one day anyway. I remember thinking just really cynical. I remember one time my mom said something like, "Oh, I saw so and so. They brought their little baby in. It was so cute," and blah, blah, blah. And I said, all I see when I see babies are more people that are going to eventually, cut me off in traffic, that kind of stuff. But at the time, I still, I could be funny and hang out with people. But I tell you what, I love doing whatever made me happy, being irresponsible, blowing money and all this kind of stuff, because my thought was, I don't have a duty to anybody, really, other than myself, my temporary happiness. Now, I was never a monster. I still loved my family. I would still get, I remember one time riding around with friends, and they were Christians, or said they were at the time, and they were making fun of, we were riding down the road in a car. They were making fun of this odd-looking girl driving a car. And I said, got two Christians in the car and an atheist, and the atheist is the only one bothered by you guys making fun of this chick, so I still had this sense of, righteousness or whatever, like I imagine we all do. But it was a really, really dark time in my life. Certain things started to happen, I would say around 8 to 7 years ago. I started being a little more receptive. Like I felt like revisiting this whole religion deal. Like, are there things? I started just maturity. You realizing that you don't know everything, and you could have been wrong about things in the past. So I was willing to go back and start from scratch and start reevaluating things. And over the years, I became a little more receptive to it and things like that. I met my wife. Now I'm kind of blending several of these years together, because to tell you the truth, I couldn't jot it down on a calendar and tell you exactly where things started to really turn around for me. But my wife, that was a big part of it. And also, David, your book, that was another thing. And that was when I was really starting to open my mind up more. And I read the arguments, and I thought, man, this is really something. This stuff is, because I know, David is my brother, and you're an extremely smart person. And
Thank you.
I could go on for that for a while. I don't mean just in religion. I mean mathematics, science, and all that. So
Thank you.
I thought your arguments were really good. The case you were making made a lot of sense. And that was great, because that was around the time I was really starting to come back to the faith. But like Mark, I didn't have a moment where I just like fell down on the floor and cried and, all that kind of stuff. It's more like, I guess a good analogy would be being in a vehicle and all the windows are fogged up. And then they just slowly, all the windows become clear. And now I can see exactly where I'm going. I can see where I've been, what's around me, like, where am I headed? And where I'm headed, that's a big part of it. But being able to see behind me clearly has been a huge thing. I'm back. I'm still not perfect. And I feel like I say that too much. Like when I'm talking to my wife, hey, I know I'm not perfect, but I have to remind myself that, because I think I don't want to become like the people that I didn't like back in the day, that, they were elders at the church and they had all the answers, and they could be some of the most self-righteous, judgmental, mean people, because they had all the answers. And they thought they were better than everybody else. And I just don't want to be that way. So I always remind myself I'm not that way. And I started listening increasingly for the past several years. Our Uncle Brian, and you had mentioned to me things about like Bill Craig on apologetics, the cosmological argument and things like that. And I just became obsessed with it. To this day, I spend on average about an hour to 2 hours on average per day, either watching apologetics videos, listening to, say, your podcast, books and things like that. And I've just been stunned at the amount of material that is out there written by extremely intelligent people that believe in God, and they have very good reason. That's why I am really bothered when I hear people say faith versus reason.
Right.
I believe Jesus is the answer for a lot of reasons. And I can promise you,
Come on.
none of them have to do with my fear of death.
That's right.
None of them. I spent years totally fine with the idea that if I die and I just disappear, what is the point in being scared of it? Really? I mean, which I don't want to digress, but I hear this argument a lot of times that they say that whenever people have near-death experiences, or they die and they see family members or God or whatever, I always hear the argument, well, couldn't humans just have evolved? That's your brain, making it easier to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's not logical, because actually that would make people more inclined to take risk and things like that, because, hey, you keep on living. I have no problem with the idea of dying and not existing. Well, I'm sorry, I have a problem with it. I don't like the idea, but that's not the reason I believe Jesus is who he said he was. I think I could go on forever, obviously, but there's so much good evidence. That's why I believe it. And definitely one of my favorite quotes is, because this really sums up why I believe what I believe, was by C.S. Lewis, where he said that he believes in Christianity like he believes in the sun. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, not just because I see it, but by it, I can see everything else. And out of all I was a hardcore atheist to anti-theist to nihilist, Buddhist, pantheist, naturalist, scientismist. I mean, name it. I've dabbled in it, studied it, tried to live by it and all that. And this just makes way too much sense. I can't prove it like I can prove 2 + 2 = 4. But like you said in one of your podcasts, David, I just know it. I'm not the brightest on the planet, but I'm fairly, I'm reasonably sharp, and I understand what delusion is. I understand what wishful thinking is. I understand. In fact, I used to use those same arguments against Christians. I get it, and I'm just here to say it works wonders for me. I've got a long way to go in becoming a better and better person, but I just feel like I am a better person because of this unparalleled amount of love and wonder that you get from opening yourself up to God, even when you don't understand it entirely. Just the wonderful things that come out of it is just truly all the evidence I need. But I'll still listen to atheists and secularists, give their best arguments, and I really do listen. And they just don't hold water anymore. They did when I was a kid. They just don't anymore.
Man, amen. I've heard some of this already, of course, being your brother, but every single time, especially being your brother, I prayed for years and years and years. I know Mom did too, and others. My goodness. And after many, many years, I did stop praying, not because I didn't care. I thought, God, you've heard my prayer now so many times. You know what my opinion is. And it's like, now that I gave up, in the sense of gave up that he could change it, but this sense of God, I just saw the pain. So, Stephen, if someone listens to this podcast and they feel the kind of pain and hatred, anger, I think you used the word anger and so forth toward God, what would you say to them? What would you say to the people who feel that kind of anger toward God? Do they have to do it just like you and wait years and years and years? Or what would you say to them? If you could go back in time travel and talk to yourself 15, 20 years ago, or whatever it was, in that rough season, that dark season you called it, what would you say to yourself?
I would love to go back and tell myself a few things in no particular order. That's a really good question. I would say first, I would say realize that you are very emotional right now. This is not an intellectual rejection of God. It feels like it, but it's not. It's purely emotional. You're upset, and you have good reason. Very good reason to be upset and sad and betrayed. I felt very betrayed. I felt like a fool for believing what I believed. And also a lot of anger. Boy, I was mad. I would say you're emotional and it's okay, but just realize that is clouding your judgment right now, and don't do anything. Don't act on it right this second. Other than one action I would take is seek counsel. Don't go to the places you've been before where you didn't get the answers. So if I was at a church and they didn't have the good answers, other than, well, just believe it. Because I distinctly remember a time I was trying to believe in God. I kid you not. I was trying and I couldn't. It's like, I can't. I can't. And I thought, well, I can't. Well, it felt like I couldn't, but looking back at that time, I was also emotional. So I would first say, realize you're emotional. Second, go keep looking for the answers because they exist. You won't have an answer to every question, but the answers that do matter are out there. There are people that went through way worse than what I went through. Now, to me at the time, it seemed like I was up there with the Holocaust. This is the most awful thing in the world. And it was bad. But my point is, there are so many people that have been through far worse, and they're okay. And so keep looking for the answers because they are there. And the last thing I would say is, hey, dummy, you don't know everything. Just remember that. Don't read a statement and go, oh boy, they summed that up. Well, let me turn off the computer and go back to what I was doing, living my life that way. Continue looking. I'm just amazed at the level of arrogance I had, and I see it all the time. And I know adults see it all the time with kids, especially in their early 20s or 20s. You just think you know it all. You got it all figured out, and you don't. You might know a lot, but there's so much you don't know. So I would say recognize that you are upset, and we don't make great choices when we're upset. Two, find the answers because they're out there. And third, be humble. Just be humble. I think that would have helped me out. And I'll add one last thing is also be very aware of the fact that you're going to lean toward believing in things that allow you to do exactly what you want to do. So I had all those things going against me,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Because, hey, a lot of people, when they hear about Christians, like what Stephen Hawking said, religion is a fairy tale for people afraid of the dark.
Afraid of the dark.
And it's like, okay, sure. Okay. Maybe there are some people out there that they choose religion because they're afraid of the dark. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of how to sum it up. Just keep in mind, you don't know everything, and realize that if you just hang tight, things will begin to make sense. Crystal clear sense, actually.
Hey, man, well articulated. Thank you for saying that. I think it was a wonderful idea. It reminds me of something I've said through the years. In fact, I said it not long ago, a couple times in different sermons, and you're one of the reasons why I say it every time. I did a sermon on how to overcome grief, and I talk about repressed grief, and I'm saying in that sermon that it's very common. Statistics demonstrate this. It's very common for people to leave the faith because of what psychologists would call repressed grief. And so they're so mad at God, they don't want to believe in him. It's that old sad but true but kind of funny anecdote about God doesn't exist and I hate him.
Yeah.
Does that in that kind of sense? But it's just that there's a deep sadness. A lot of people fade from the faith because they have repressed grief. They haven't got into it. And so it's especially when someone dies or someone gets hurt or there's something tragic like that. I appreciate William Lane Craig says it. People ask him oftentimes in debates and discussion, they say, is there anything that would cause you to leave the faith? And he says, of course. And think of several things that would cause me to leave the faith. I can't think of any reason why I should leave the faith. I might leave the faith because my wife died a tragic death. I might leave the faith if that's right. I might leave the faith of whatever. But none of these are good reasons that I should leave the faith. And I really appreciate the distinction. I think he's exactly right, because that's exactly why so many people do leave the faith. They either have a very childlike understanding of faith, and so if they pray, I believed, and then they get the job they wanted, the relationship, the boyfriend or girlfriend, I mean, something silly, all the way to the serious tragedy and trauma you went through, and I, of course, know about it. And nevertheless, the point is that kind of grief needs to be dealt with. And I've said this for years, and it's because of you, Steve. For years, I've thought in the back of my head all the years. I tell people all that I said this in my book, that the proper response to trauma and grief is grieving, not leaving the faith. It's not a proper response. The proper response is to deal with the problem, and the problem is sadness. The problem is not you've been duped. Now, maybe you have been duped, but first get the grief fixed, and then, I mean that loosely fixed, I don't mean get over it, I mean deal with that, and then make up your mind better, because otherwise, like you said, you'll find a reason. And I really appreciate what you said about you'll tend to find religions that suit your needs, and of course that can work for Christians too. They're afraid of the dark, or they're afraid of this.
Absolutely.
They want to make their mom and dad happy, and that can't happen. Of course, I don't really care why Christians do it. I care about the reasons for it. No, that is to say, if there's some benefit for why a person might believe it, okay, that's fine. Let's talk about all the possible benefits. It makes me happy, whatever. The question I'm really concerned about in religion is, what are your reasons for believing it? And anyway, enough of that. So I appreciate, Steve, what you said, very much so. And if I want to wrap up on this, if I can, Mark, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to, talk just a quick second. I could see the layers as I look back over my life, what caused me to shy away. It's the fear of rejection. I was being rejected by everything around me in my mind, so just to be rejected by God would, by that added guilt from the church, was one more thing I just couldn't take. So I was furious. I was angry at everything around me. Might as well just throw God into the mix, so, I mean, that's just layers. And I was confused too, because you don't know what the right thing is. Like, Stephen had mentioned the Bible. It was nothing that Catholics really look at. They look at epistles, they look at little short sentences. So, I didn't know the Bible either. I had no idea what Jesus actually talked about. I just knew that there was a bunch of mumbo jumbo at the church, and so there's this bunch of confusion. And when I look back and I see those layers, I had to deal with each one of those as I got older, and how do you get over it? But there's absolutely nothing that would cause me to leave the faith. Now, nothing. I don't fear death. I'm not afraid of the dark. I don't. I'm dying. I know I'm dying. It's a process. We all die somehow or another. Some way we're going to do it. So it doesn't. I have no fear of it. So it's a very real thing in my life. Me following Jesus is a very real thing, and it's not something I can deviate from now. I know for certainty.
And real quick, I think it's worth pointing out that it's not easy to try to follow Jesus.
No.
I know some people think it's just like, well, it just makes you feel better. But I'm sure David, as a pastor, I mean, a lot of decisions are not easy to make. I mean, it's not always black and white and things like that, but there are also black and white things. This is wrong, that's wrong, and it could be really, I guess you deal with that, but I would think that as Christians, a lot of times we have to not only say in front of other people, like, do you think such and such is wrong? Like, well, I think it's pretty clear that the text says it is, but you also have to tell yourself that. And to me, that's the most, because you can keep your mouth shut and not tell anybody anything about their life, but it's looking at yourself. Like, there are things you just really want to do, but you're not supposed to do it. So following Jesus is not all easy by any stretch of the imagination. It's not just a feel good religion. I mean, there's a lot of tricky, painful stuff involved.
Yeah,
but it's worth it.
Absolutely. I don't know how a person stays faithful to Jesus without believing that it's true. If it's merely because it feels good, I guess there are people like that who have that kind of life where they just don't have much hardship. No one ever dies. No one hurt. They're never betrayed. They're never. But for most people, the human race, I just don't know how. I mean, that's how I'm a Christian. I've been hurt so many times, betrayed. That's a different testimony. But anyway, I mean, the only reason I'm a Christian now is because, as C.S. Lewis said, one definition of faith is when my holding on to things my reason once accepted, regardless of my changing emotions. My reason has accepted it. And I have to stick to that when my changing emotions go. I have to. Anyway, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate very much what y'all are saying. I want to wrap up real quickly the podcast for this quote. I love Stephen quoted from C.S. Lewis earlier, the quote about the sun. I just for fun, we'll end on that quote. C.S. Lewis was started and then, of course, was, I think, unanimously voted to be the president of this called the Oxford Socratic Club. And he wrote a paper, and then an atheist would write a paper, and they would respond back and forth and things for a long time. And you can read certain of those essays that exist, and there's a collection of those essays called, it's not just of those essays, but there's a collection of essays called God in the Dock is the name of the essay collection, but an essay in it is also called God in the Dock. It's a great collection. But anyway, one of the portions of that collection is what he wrote a paper to that Socratic Club is called Is Theology Poetry? And here's a segment, here's an excerpt from that, and it ends with a quote, Stephen, you gave, and this is, I thought, just very good, I think a great way to end on it. Lewis says this in his essay, Is Theology Poetry? He says, I was taught at school when I had done a sum to, quote, prove my answer. The proof or verification of my Christian answer to the cosmic sum is this. When I accept theology, I may find difficulties at this point or that, in harmonizing it with some particular truths which are embedded in the mythical cosmology derived from science. But I can get in, or allow for, science as a whole. Granted that reason is prior to matter, and that the light of the primal reason illuminates finite minds, I can understand how men should come by observation and inference to know a lot about the universe they live in. If, on the other hand, I swallow the scientific cosmology as a whole, then not only can I not fit in Christianity, but I cannot even fit in science. If minds are wholly dependent on brains, and brains on biochemistry, and biochemistry in the long run on the meaningless flux of the atoms, I cannot understand how the thought of those minds should have any more significance than the sound of the wind in the trees. And this is to me the final test. This is how I distinguish dreaming and waking. When I am awake, I can, in some degree, account for and study my dream. The dragon that pursued me last night can be fitted into my waking world. I know that there are such things as dreams. I know that I had eaten an indigestible dinner. I know that a man of my reading might be expected to dream of dragons. But while in the nightmare, I could not have fitted in my waking experience. The waking world is judged more real because it can thus contain the dreaming world. The dreaming world is judged less real because it cannot contain the waking one. For the same reason, I am certain that in passing from the scientific point of view to the theological, I have passed from dream to waking. Christian theology can fit in science, art, morality, and the sub-Christian religions. The scientific point of view cannot fit in any of these things, not even science itself. I believe in Christianity, as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. Thanks so much, Steve, for your testimony, man. I pray and hope that it encourages and blesses a lot of people. Thanks so much. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you, brother. See you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you'll listen more. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com. There are tabs at the top that let you have access to all the podcasts I've recorded, to sermons I've done, books I've written. They're all there at davidpendergrass.com. You can also check me out on Facebook, facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom, facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom, and also look at my Twitter feed at glimpse the kingdom or at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass. There's tons of ways to reach out. I hope you will. Send me your questions, send me your comments. If you'd like to support the ministries of Glimpse of the Kingdom, you can also find ways to give online on davidpendergrass.com. If you'd like for me to come and do some consulting, check out my website, davidpendergrassconsulting.com, and I'll be happy to come out and speak to your organization and help and train any way I can. God bless you. See you online.